part of the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for stopping by, and welcome to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline, right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. We are your hosts, John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol.
You can get in touch with us on Twitter at John_Sabol. You can tweet at the pod at Sabol Brothers.
And you can also find me on Twitter, too. It's Scott Sabol, my name, and then FOX, the number 8.
You guys can always shoot us some tweets, react to some of our interviews, all that good stuff. If you haven't already, be sure to smash that subscribe button on Apple and Spotify, if you will. So as we record this here in early May, Scott, we've got a cool guest here, our second former college football national champ, and a guy who knows a lot about football, and a guy who's got ties right here in Ohio at Ohio State, and none other than Bobby Carpenter.
Right.
I'm excited about this because we're going to touch a lot. Obviously, big Browns draft,
right?
What the Buckeyes did, and then his playing days, and what the current Buckeyes are going to do in about 6 months from now.
Yeah, it's crazy when you think about his playing days, which were they started 20 years ago in 2002 when he was, I think, a freshman that year.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to hear him talk about his freshman year. And, that was such a big year for Ohio State, obviously. And I'm sure he's got some stories to tell and, his experience playing in the NFL and what he's up to now and what his thoughts are just on where the Browns are, where Ohio State is. We'll try to cover a lot in the span of about 30 minutes. And we'll have the complete interview with Bobby Carpenter right after this.
What's up, everyone? Chase Smith here, host of the Chase Smith Podcast, and my podcast reflects who I am. My hobbies, my interests, my passions, my curiosities, my careers, my questions, and my family. I'll spend time talking about all types of sports, movies, TV shows, trending news stories, and other cultural events, and even faith. This is who I am, and I hope I can get to know you as well. Join me on the Chase Smith Podcast, and let's have some thought-provoking conversations, only on the Press Play Podcast Network.
Hey everyone, this is Mike Voorhees.
And I'm Brian Shaw. No, not the pitcher. We're the Guardians of the Land MLB podcast, formerly a Swing and a Tribe.
Don't have time to watch 162 games of baseball? We do. We have you covered with recaps of the games, stats, and analysis throughout the MLB season.
Subscribe now to Guardians of the Land and Press Play Pods for all your Cleveland sports analysis.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
It again with pressure. He's not getting away this time. Sacked by Bobby Carpenter. Dials it in. Intercepted with the pickup. Bobby Carpenter. For the Wolverines right now. And they'll run hard behind Dudley, and he is tackled from behind by Bobby Carpenter. 3rd and 2. Take all kinds of trouble. Bobby Carpenter brings him down. Intercepted by Carpenter. I told you their linebackers make plays. First big play of the game for the Buckeyes.
Welcome back to Sabol Brothers on the Baseline, all part of the Press Play Podcast Network. Our guest today is no stranger to football, 2-time Big Ten with the Ohio State Buckeyes, national champ with the Buckeyes. Our second former national champ guest, if you guys remember out there, the other one was Tyvis Powell. He's an 8-year NFL vet, 2006 first-round draft pick number 18 of the Dallas Cowboys. Can't believe it's been that long ago already. It feels like yesterday for me. He also played for the Dolphins, Lions, and Patriots, also co-host of the Morning Juice on 97.1 The Fan in Columbus, and a contributor to ESPN's morning show Get Up. Man, I hope I didn't forget any other of your credentials and accolades, Bobby.
Do a little bit of everything, it's all good. So that was perfect. Thank you.
There we go. Bobby Carpenter, welcome. And good to finally talk and meet up and get this thing going, man. A lot of football chatter. So welcome to the show. Real quick, before we kind of get into the draft and before we get into the Browns and what they've done, I kind of wanted to go back a little bit here about your background a little bit. You know, I want to ask about your family because you have 3 brothers, all played Division I football. Your father played 10 years in the NFL with the Oilers, Giants, and Rams. Man, football just runs deep with your family.
Yeah, it was kind of our family business for a long time. My dad never really pushed any of us into it by any stretch. He actually prohibited, us from playing until we were older. I couldn't play till I was a 7th grader. He let my brothers play when they were 6th, my 2 middle. I think my youngest brother even got to play in 5th, but he'd gotten older by then. I think they wore down his resolve and will and slowly beat him into submission by asking him to play. But he loved the game. He coached us all in high school. It was something I always wanted to do. You only hope that, you have enough ability that if you work hard enough, you can marry those two together and ultimately go play. College was my goal. And then, NFL was just kind of a pipe dream. But, I look back now and, I walked through the high school that I grew up in. I'd see my picture there. And it's beside my dad's. My 3 brothers' pictures are up there with us as well. And it was definitely a long shadow that was cast every day when you walk through the GAC there with the cafeteria and lunchroom and everything and gym. And you'd see a picture of your dad up there playing for the New York Giants and, understanding he's your coach and everything as well. But there was a lot that went into that. But yeah, it was our family business. He wanted to make sure that we always had a shot to do it if we wanted. And thankfully it kind of worked out for everybody.
So how big of an influence was your dad in your playing days once you got to Ohio State in the NFL? At that point, that's kind of a big deal. Did your dad kind of ratchet up his intensity a little bit at that point? Or did he realize, hey, it's just kind of, hey, now you've made it. Now you're kind of on your own. What was his role in you at that point?
It's really interesting. My dad was, like I said, he didn't let us play. And so he was never one to force advice. He was always there when asked. And he did give me a couple of pieces. When I left to go to Ohio State, a lot of parents, they're up there and, we had freshman camp back in the day and parents are all there, checking their sons in and they're doing this and that. And then we move out of the dorm and their parents are there to move them from the hotel or rather to the hotel to the dorm at the end of camp. I mean, they didn't come at all for the second part. My mom dropped me off there. I had like a bag of clothes, a bunch of stuff, and knowing I was going to be able to go back home and drive to Lancaster and get stuff afterwards. We were done with camp, but my dad had, 2 days. And the day before he told me, he's like, hey, so I went to Miami, Ohio. He's like, your grandfather, is a superintendent for a glass installation company, worked his butt off, worked 60 hours a week, driving to Columbus. So I didn't have much. He's like, my options, if I left Miami, Ohio, were to go back and work in anchor hockey and work in a factory. It's like, so I saw a lot of guys quit over their tenure because it's hard. It's like, be prepared for this to be the hardest thing in your life. If you want to quit, it's up to you, but let it be known. I'd recommend against it and I'll counsel you, whatever you need, but you get 2 weeks back on the couch and then you're out. And so he was tough. He was always there. And he listened to me whine to him all the time. My freshman year, I'm not playing enough. I need, the coaches don't like me. I want to transfer. And he's sitting there like, hey man, if it was easy and you didn't want to leave and you didn't want to transfer, you didn't go to the right place because they're not making you better. You're on a great team. You have great players around you. There's so much good stuff going on. Like, you got to understand you're a freshman here and this will all work out as long as you keep doing what you're doing and keep working hard. They're on you because they like you. The old adage of that. And it's tough as an 18, 19-year-old to hear that. And I get to the NFL and it was like a dream come true. Getting to play for Bill Parcells, who he played with in New York or played under in New York. I played under Bill Belichick, who he was with on that staff in New York. Wade Phillips, our coach in Dallas too. He was on his dad's staff with Bum in Houston. My dad was down there. So there was a lot of familiar faces. And he'd give me little nuggets about how to kind of talk to those guys. And he'd talk to them. And especially with Parcells, he goes, he's going to figure out what's up with you and how to kind of push what buttons you have. And after talking, he goes, I figured you're a lot more like your mom now than your dad. And Bill used to always throw things out like at practice about that. Like, you're way more like your mom than your father. And then I'd walk by, afterwards, he goes, I meant that as a compliment, right? And he's like, these guys don't know. I'm like, I know, Bill. He's like, you got so much Susie, New York accent, that Susie in you. And it was, I mean, it was great comics. I knew what my mom was made of. I knew how tough she was. And, she was great friends with Bill's ex-wife, Judy, for a long time. So, there's so many things and like parallels and stuff. And he came down, and it was funny. My dad came down my rookie year to Dallas, over the Thanksgiving Day break, and got to watch both our games, Sunday and Thursday, at home. And then I asked Parcells, we didn't have anybody coming to practice. Like some teams, you'll have a lot of, family and friends come in, and I've seen different theories from coaches on it. Because if you want somebody to come in, if it's someone that means a lot to you, an influential person in your life, father, brother, uncle, coach, whatever it might be, not your entourage, not your boys. This ain't hangout time. We're here to work. Have them come in. So I'm like a little nervous going to ask, like, hey, can my dad come? So I asked him, and he's like, yeah. It's like, hey, my dad wanted to know if my mom could come too. He's like, he never mentioned anything about women. And he's like, Susie's like, absolutely. He's like, get him in. For the whole Monday practice, him, my parents and Bill like sat down and talked during the practice, like in the corner of the indoor. He only came down to like address stuff here and there, and the guys were amazing. I've never seen Bill talk to anybody that long, and it was just pretty surreal when I'd watch my dad get around former players and coaches of his, because that was kind of my window into his youth of what he was, and that you act differently when. No different than when you get around your college buddies and you're 45. Like, when you're around guys you played with in the NFL or college, like you're instantly transported back to that time in your life. And so it was a pretty unique thing to watch him, ham it up, because he's a pretty quiet guy. And it was something that was pretty great, and really enjoyed it, and definitely a unique experience.
Wow, very cool. I love old stories about Bill Parcells. You read about it, you hear about it, and that's great that you had it up close and personal relationship with him as your coach, and also the relationship with your parents. Bobby, let's go back a little bit in your playing days at Ohio State. You were a freshman when the Buckeyes won the national title in 2002. Team was loaded with talent, a lot of NFL guys on there. What do you remember as a freshman on that team that upset Miami?
Oh, goodness. Like I said, how hard it was every day, how Ben Hartsock used to kick my butt in practice, how, I'm like, man, this is rough. Like, so hard. Everyone's so big, so fast. And at the time, like and I always say, guys get there, like it's an adjustment. It takes a couple weeks. And now when guys come in the spring and summer, it's a little earlier. And AJ Hawk and I were kind of the two, and Doug Daddish. Maurice enrolled early, Claret, in the spring. He was one of the first to do it. And then AJ, Doug, and I came in early and worked out all summer. And so we kind of got a feel for the guys, but still, like, playing's a whole nother beast. And so it takes you a little bit of time to kind of feel your way out. And when you're in the season, then it's not technique work, it's game planning. And they're not trying to, develop players a ton at that point. It gets you in a little bit. And I look back on it now, I'm like, heck, man, I was playing like 10, 12 snaps a game in like critical games. Like we're playing Kent State. Yeah, you get the whole second half, but we're playing critical games, playing against Wisconsin up in Camp Randall. And I'm playing, 10, 12 snaps in the game, and I look back like, gosh, you want to play more. You wish you're out there. And my dad was like, dude, they're not putting you and because they're playing AJ about the same, maybe a little more. So they're not putting both of you on the field at the same time. He's like, if you guys blow a coverage, miss the tackle, and give up a touchdown, like you lose the game, coaches are going to be all over them. Like the seniors, they're going to be all over the coaches. So, I just remember it being difficult. It was long. We played 14 games. We played in the Kickoff Classic, had a bye week, and then played 12 weeks straight. And then obviously played in the last game of the season, the national championship. So you go from high school playing 10 games. I mean, it was like the never ending season. And with that, you're struggling through class and everything else, living in a dorm for the first time in Morrill Tower. And it was a whirlwind. And then afterwards, I remembered we partied for like 2 weeks straight. We won the national championship. So that was a different type of whirlwind completely. I think I actually went out 13 or 14 days. And, we had MLK Day in there. So we had one Monday off. So like that wasn't as bad. But I think only like one Sunday night I didn't go out. But there was a party everywhere to go because it was the first time we'd won a championship since '68. So it was a surreal time. You remember the close games with Cincinnati and, Michigan, and just some of the games that probably shouldn't have been as close, Penn State, all this stuff, and Will Allen making huge interceptions, to seal games. And it's just, it was a different time. And I even talked to Will about this because he didn't really truly start to a senior year. He was our nickelback as a junior and didn't play at all before that. And I asked him, I was interviewing him on the radio the other day on XM, and I'm like, would you have stayed on the team if that were today? You've been there 2 years, you thought you could play, and you don't really get a chance to play nickel until like your junior year when they start working you in. You're probably playing like 30 or 40% of the snaps. You're behind two fourth year starters in Doss and Nicky. And like, would you have stayed? And he's like, it's a great question. So I'd like to believe that I would have, but it would have been a very tempting proposition to go somewhere else and play right away when you feel like you're struggling like that. So it was a great year, met some great guys. And, it's something that all bonds us together. Now, 20 years later, we'll be having our reunion for that. And it makes you feel really old in a hurry.
Where's your national championship ring, by the way?
Well, I'm in my office here. It's got a wall safe, like a big gun safe, like 5-footer back there. And I've got my national championship, my 2 Big Ten championship rings, and then my 4-year Letterman ring, which it probably to me means about as much as those two, just being there, being able to letter 4 years and then staying in school 4 years as well. But I mean, I could honestly, guys, probably count on 2 hands the times I've worn it. And probably on 1 hand since I graduated college. Like I wore it a decent amount early on because that was a cool thing to do. But I mean, dude, the ring is I always tell people, like, the ring and the gold pants and all that stuff, like, they're simply a catalyst to be able to like conjure memories and to tell stories. Like, they're great and I have them, but like, I don't need to wear them. Like, the memories and the experiences are so much more impactful. You put it on, it's something that connects everybody, but it's not truly like the meaning of it. It's there, but like, they'll never be able to take away all of the things that happened in the experiences you had.
So, Bobby, let's shift gears. Let's talk about the NFL draft. It was a big weekend for the Browns. They drafted 9 rookies. Kind of a rare draft class there. What surprised you from the Browns selections?
Well, it's always unique when you don't have a first round pick, and they didn't have a second round pick either. Picking at the top of the 3rd round, and they had some needs. You look at defensive end position, they probably like to address. Receiver maybe is a position they would have liked to address. You can always get deeper in the secondary, but your first 2, your first round pick for the next couple of years is Deshaun Watson, and based upon the hit rate of quarterbacks, I mean, it's not a bad pick. You had to pay him, but that's a heck of a deal. You got a known quantity. So, it wasn't overly surprising. I really like the David Bell pick out of Purdue, to tell you the truth. Like, he didn't run really well. He ran like a 4.6 something, 4.65, 4.66. Not great, but he's a big guy. He's a contested ball catcher. He's a physical receiver. And, he doesn't get a ton of separation, and people act like that's a big deal. But, DeAndre Hopkins, who was with Watson down in Houston for so many years, like, he's bigger than Bell, but he never got a ton of separation either. He was never the fastest guy in the world. He's a great route runner and catches the ball. And if you have a quarterback who's accurate, sometimes that's really all you need. And so, looking at that and seeing that, I love the fit of Bell. I like the fact, you get Alex Wright, a rush guy. You needed some rush. You needed some defensive line help. And then the Jerome Ford pick out of Cincinnati. Like, he's a sneaky good running back, man. Like, the kid was really good. Let's not forget, he was on a college football playoff team. He originally committed and played at Alabama. So, like, the innate talent is there. He can do a lot of stuff. And so that running back room in Cleveland is going to be crowded, but like great franchises, they realize they're not going to be able to keep all those guys. It's just, Hunt's last year, I believe, on his deal. And so you draft a replacement a year early. And so you're not scrambling for need later. And so I really kind of like what they did for the most part.
So would you say Bell and Jerome Ford, those 2 guys, are probably the 2 most intriguing prospects Browns fans should really keep your eyes on, in your opinion?
Well, I don't know how much Ford will play it this year just because of, obviously Chubb and Hunt, but, I think long-term, he's going to be someone that's pretty intriguing. I think it was great value there. I do think Bell will contribute this year. If you look at him, you got Peoples-Jones, you've got Bell, and, they're probably gonna have to sign somebody. I mean, obviously you traded for Amari Cooper, but you probably want another guy who's still a deep threat to be thrown in there. But I think those are kind of the most intriguing. We'll see, what Wright can give as a rush guy, whether they bring Clowney back or not, that's going to be something that, we'll have to figure out. But A lot of that will probably be determined by how well some of these guys look early in minicamp.
Especially if Jarvis Landry comes back, he may not be that quote deep threat, but he could be another guy that could be impactful. How about Schwartz? I mean, he's supposed to be that downfield threat guy, but he had I think a pretty bad year last year. He's got some room to grow as well. So
Schwartz is really fast, and you want him to be that, and I think he has the potential, but sometimes it takes guys a little bit of time to grow. So I don't like to write guys off early in their career if they struggle some. So, he's still a young player. We'll see how he looks this year. And that's why I think they'll want to see that's kind of how OTAs and mini camps shake out before they probably sign any veteran pieces.
Was there any player Andrew Berry drafted that was kind of a head scratcher to you? I mean, we talked about, the lack of wide receiver picks early on, but was there something that really stood out? It's like, well, wait a minute here. This is coming out of the blue.
Not really. I mean, obviously they would have liked to have drafted a wideout, but everybody's hammering on Green Bay for not taking a wideout, with their first 2 picks. Like, I felt like there was kind of a drop there. I would have liked to have maybe seen the Browns maybe trade up and draft, George Pickens. I really liked him, but you have to start weighing your draft capital. And do you want to trade up to ultimately get a guy like that? And he obviously, he had some injury issues. And I think there's some off the field stuff a little bit that you worry about as well. And so it's all about trying to find value at each spot. And I thought, they did a good job of drafting for depth and some developmental pieces that'll, be able to kind of hit here in the coming years.
One guy, in my opinion, Bobby, that was really intriguing, and I don't know if you've seen the viral clips of his press conference after his first meeting with the media, was the defensive tackle out of Oklahoma, Perion Winfrey, in the 4th round. I mean, that guy has some high energy. I mean, that guy, they just got to hone in that energy to make sure he can, do some positive with that and not get too crazy on the field. Did you get a chance to listen to what he had to say, what I'm referring to?
No, I didn't hear it. I unfortunately didn't. I like him though, as a player, and he'll be a guy that, maybe need to work a little bit against the run, not the biggest, beefiest dude in the world, but, as far as, pass rush inside, like, he has the ability to provide some of that. And so I love him, for that aspect. And, if he's going to provide you some energy, man, and be that, a great culture guy, which people make that out to be a bad thing. But if that's the case, man, that's fantastic as well.
Yeah, Bobby, he was barking in his interview. Barking.
Hey, man, everybody's different. Like, I play with a lot of dudes that some people might define them as, quote, weird, but you know what? They are who they are, and that's kind of what it is.
Yeah, the reception here in Cleveland, the fans absolutely love it. Obviously, the dog pound and everything, but people are loving. He's become a fan favorite in just a few days.
So the Browns surprising everyone by taking a kicker in the 4th round. What, Cade York out of LSU? Do you like that move, drafting a kicker that early? You don't see that very often.
Well, I mean, if you've got kicking problems, I feel like you go get a kicker, and that's usually what people do. And everyone criticizes it, but it happens every once in a while. You see a guy drafted somewhere between the 2nd to 5th round, and people say it's too high. But he was a terrific kicker at LSU, 15 of 19 for his 50+ yarders, I believe. And when you have that, like, if you're a team in Cleveland, like, you're not just building to get talented players. You're trying to build a roster to compete in a very, very crowded AFC. And so when points are at a premium in the playoffs, you need to go get a field goal. Like, the last thing you want to have to worry about is having an average kicker. Like, you look at Cincinnati and how successful they were, their kicker was nails, man. He was ice when you need him to be. So if you have to go draft a guy for that to happen, you go draft a guy and you go get him.
So we got to ask your take on the Baker Mayfield drama. Have the Browns messed this thing up? I mean, it just seems like it's that one thing that's still hovering, above everybody in the room. Obviously, when it gets resolved, people forget about it. But have they messed this up? Has Baker messed anything up here since all this went down?
Well, I think that messed it up. I mean, I don't necessarily agree with Baker on his full assessment of what happened, but there are some real truisms. You look at his coaching staff and the wild inconsistency that he's had last year. He's struggling. I'm like, man, just sit down. You need to protect him. You're getting cleared to play. And there's a big difference between being healthy and being cleared to play. Like, being cleared to me is you're not doing any further damage. It's going to provide irreparable harm. But, he obviously wasn't right. he's had some accuracy issues in the past, but like last year was just an anomaly. He could not throw an accurate ball. And so, dude, you're hurting your team, but he's a competitive dude. And here's, I think, his main problem is Baker still views himself, as the walk-on dude who couldn't get a scholarship, that, they wouldn't give, a starting job to a Texas Tech, transfers to Oklahoma, and then ultimately wins a Heisman Trophy and becomes the number 1 overall pick. And so I'm like, dude, you went from somebody who didn't have any expectations, people were constantly doubting you, to someone who was the number 1 overall pick. And people weren't saying that was a bad choice. And you had good film out there. Like, not people aren't out to get you. Like, there's just expectations for you now. It's far different than being the underdog. And so you don't have to be the dude that's yipping and snapping at everybody. And he hears a lot of things. And that's what I feel like that's what his driver is. But at some point, man, you have to transition from, being like I said, being someone who has zero expectations to someone who's expected to be successful because you were the number 1 overall pick. And I think that's probably where his mentality has kind of been stunted and his growth has kind of stopped, is that's kind of been the case. Because I think Baker's a good quarterback. You go look at him 2 years ago. He was very, very solid, played well. Like, I think you could win a Super Bowl with Baker Mayfield. I think Deshaun Watson is better, but I'm not going to sit here and say that, like, the Browns, like, and obviously Odell Beckham Jr., that was a mess last year, but a lot of that I think had to do with Baker's injury and his inability to, just kind of connect with him and start forcing the ball. Some of those things, matter, or they can, begin to manifest themselves and metastasize. It just gets really toxic. And I feel like that kind of what happened, but they gave him his 5th-year option. Like, I don't know what their option is. Guys who I talked to people in the league, like, nobody was going to trade for him and pay the $19 million. And so it's like, all right, so are you going to pay $10 to $12 million of his deal and maybe get a 5th-round pick back? I think the Browns are kind of waiting to see if someone gets hurt or maybe someone struggles mightily in camp, and then you trade him. And also part of the reality is Deshaun Watson's probably going to get suspended, 3 to 6 games. So we'll see ultimately how that shakes out. And they have Jacoby Brissett on the roster as well. And I don't think you can carry Baker in, but it would just be a really interesting test case to see if they're like, hey, Baker, why don't you start the first 4 to 6 games or whatever it is? And we'll give you our full support and you can go from there. Deshaun's our guy, but this is an audition for you for the rest of the league so that when you become a free agent next year, you'll be able to go have some good film and have people have positive thoughts in their mind.
Yeah, Bobby, I've been covering this story since the beginning here in town, and just like getting the pulse of the team and Baker's people in his camp. I mean, there's no way they're going to bring him back into that locker room. They just physically, they can't do it because it's a bad look in a lot of different ways. It's a distraction. They're either going to, I agree, they're either going to wait till someone gets hurt, or ultimately some team's going to maybe try to trade for him because they're not going to release him, at least not yet, because they would have done that by now. So we'll see what happens. If no one else gets hurt, I think Seattle probably still seems to be a potential option for him. For you were a player in the NFL that got traded and got released. You know what it feels like to be kind of in limbo, or maybe not limbo per se, but being in a situation where things are completely out of your control. How tough is that as a professional athlete to be in that role? Because Baker's in it now at a most extreme level, though.
I guess a lot of that happened when I was in Dallas, and some of that comes with probably being a 1st-round pick. And you're stressing, you're straining, and you become a little toxic in your mind with things. And it got rough a little bit in Dallas. And after my 4th year, I played really well and thought, like, okay, maybe I'm going to get an extension, couple-year extension here, and maybe finish my career in Dallas. After my 4th season, they draft Sean Lee out of Penn State and goes on to be a good player for him. And there's about 2 weeks there where I'm like, they're not going to keep me. And I think I was at the North-South game for my brother when that actually transpired. And I'm like, all right, well, they're not going to keep me. Where am I ultimately going to go? And I was like going to Napa with the Wittens and my wife the next week. And Jason's like, I'd be going crazy. I'm like, you know what, man? Like, I've always, been a man of faith. And it's like, things are out of your control. And honestly, it was kind of the best thing that happened. I go to St. Louis, play really well in camp, get released there, go to Miami, play pretty well, get released there. And, I went to Detroit and I'm like, I didn't even know if anyone was going to pick me up after that. I was like, I've got pretty good film. I had a couple of friends who were scouts. Like, I don't even know what the hell is going on. Like, it doesn't make any sense. I know some of it's numbers situations with injuries to other positions, whatever. And I finally got to Detroit, and my last 2.5 years, I said, just screw it, dude. Like, I don't care anymore. They can cut me. I have zero control over that. I'm going to go, I'm having fun. Like, I'm going to play hard. It's not going to be reckless and be lazy, but like, I'm going to enjoy it. And whatever they're going to do, they're going to do. It doesn't, I can't control that anymore. And so like, it's hard when you've never experienced that before. But once you kind of realize, like, dude, I'm not going to let you suck the joy out of something that I love doing for so long. And now I know I have a finite amount of time left to do it. So I'm going to go out there and just enjoy it, man. I'm going to have fun. I'm going to have fun at practice. Obviously, not every day is great. But in the games, man, like, you screw something up, forget about it. Like, and that's how I used to always be. But like, you get in your head so much because you just feel like that constant burden and strain is always on you. And so that's the advice I'd give him. Like, dude, forget about it. You'll end up somewhere. Go there, whether you're first string, second string, third. Go compete. Go have fun in practice. Go let it rip. And you know what? If they think enough of you to play, great. If they don't, hopefully you get another opportunity. But like, you can't control other people's thoughts about you. So just go out there and do the best you can.
So let's shift gears. Let's talk about the Buckeyes. Okay, so 6 Buckeyes were drafted, 7 if you include transfer Jamison Williams from Alabama. Which kid got drafted to the best situation?
I like Olave with the Saints. He's got Michael Thomas opposite of him. Now, the problem is Sean Payton's not there. Drew Brees isn't the quarterback. It's Jameis Winston. But they're inside. They're in a dome. They have a lot of talent around him. In the offense, he's the perfect complement to Michael Thomas, who's a similar style receiver to Garrett Wilson. Very distinct, powerful route runner, and can get over the top on guys, but that's not nothing. He's a leaper. He's a contested ball catcher. And so Olave, who's silky smooth in his routes down the field, really a perfect compliment right there.
I was surprised to see Cleveland natives Tyreek Smith and Thayer Munford, both former Buckeyes, drop in the draft. Bobby Munford, especially him, I thought he would have gone earlier. Smith ultimately went in the 5th round, I think, to Seattle.
Yeah.
Munford went to the 7th to the Raiders in Vegas there. Why do you think both those guys fell, especially Munford?
Well, Munford had a ton of injury issues. I mean, he had back problems when he was at Ohio State, and he had some really good film at tackle, some decent film at guard, position flexibility. But what it comes down to, unless you're a great player, teams aren't going to mess with injuries later. They'll take a flyer on you late, but that's what drops guys usually from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th round down to the 6th and 7th is that we can find someone else who's comparable, who we don't necessarily have the injury concerns. And so I think that happened to Munford, and Smith had some injury concerns, but a lot of it with him was there was just some inconsistencies in play as well. He'd flash, and then he'd have a couple, a handful, parts of games where like it was average on the field. And so you're trying to piece those two things together and understand, okay, why is it this sometimes and why is it that another? And I think that's probably the inconsistency for Tyreek Smith.
So OSU has produced a lot of phenomenal linebackers over the years. We mentioned obviously yourself, AJ Hawk, James Laurinaitis, and many more. But why has there been a drop-off over the years? Anything that you can pinpoint?
They had Ryan Shazier afterwards. Raekwon McMillan, has been pretty good. Oh goodness. Baker he's from Cleveland. I believe he's a St. Ed's guy. He's doing good things down in Miami. The thing is, like, some of those guys haven't stayed 4 years. I think that impacts it. The longer you're there, the more well-known you become at Ohio State. And last year, you got to think they had Baron Browning. He's had a really good year with the Broncos. Pete Warner was drafted in the 2nd round of the Saints. He was one of the highest graded linebackers with PFF. So they've had guys. They just maybe haven't had quite the impact dudes. I like the linebackers this year. I really like Tommy Eichenberg, Cody Simon, Steele Chambers. Like, those guys I think are going to make an impact. They have some good young players. And so part of it, recruiting the right guys, the next part of it is developing them. And I think they've got the right guys there, and those guys are tough. They're getting better. And I think they're going to really surprise some people this year.
All right, Bobby, last question, then we'll let you go for the evening. We still got a long way to go till college football starts as we record this here in early May. We're not even in training camp, but Ohio State's loaded. They lost a lot of those guys. We just mentioned those wide receivers, but they're still loaded in that wide receiving core. They got a new defensive coordinator. CJ Stroud's back, probably could be a top 2 pick next year. Anything less than a national title at this point for Ryan Day and company, in my opinion, is a disappointment. Do you think they finally get over that hump, and get that title?
I hope so. I mean, Tress won it in his 2nd year. Urban won it in his 3rd. Ryan, we'll see if he can win it now in his 4th season here as the head coach. I mean, I don't think it's a disappointment. You don't win. Like getting to a national championship, I'm never going to be disappointed. Like say it's a disappointment. Like, yeah, you don't maybe hit your expectation or hit your dream or goal. They've got the talent this year. They had it pretty close last year. They just had some missing pieces on defense. Those guys have matured. I feel like they're in a pretty good spot. And, with that, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and bet my house on them winning a national title, but they have all the ingredients you really need.
Yeah, definitely a favorite to get there, I think, in the playoff for sure. And who knows, maybe they face Bama.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be it. I'm going on some Alabama radio later on Thursday to talk about that. I've got a friend of mine down there, and he's like, it looks like they're on a collision course, so we'll see what happens.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Very cool. Well, Bobby, we want to thank you very much for joining us here on our podcast, talking about the Browns, the draft, OSU, a lot of good stories here, a lot of good memories from your playing days. Again, I want to thank you for joining us and taking almost 35 minutes out of your time to just share all this stuff with us. It's much appreciated.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, Bobby, thanks so much, man. We appreciate it.
No problem.
Well, man, Scott, we had a little cornucopia of football talk right there. How about that?
Since I'm such a old school, guy here when it comes to football, I'm saying I'm old, but I love hearing the Bill Parcells stuff. That is so funny that, his dad played for him. And then he goes, then Bill Parcells goes, wait, you're more like your mom than your dad. I can't, that's funny.
Yeah. The big tuna, Big Parcells. Yeah. Those two had some history there in Dallas, obviously Bobby's coach, but also knew his dad, as we just heard there. I thought that was really, really cool anecdotes there because, you start to hear stories of Hall of Famers that you would never really ever hear, whether it does different sports. You'll always know about maybe on the field stuff, rarely off the field, unless it's like a big high profile person. But, you get to kind of hear a little down to earth, normal guy type speak like Bobby Carpenter was just talking about that Bill Parcells was. That was pretty interesting. Had no idea.
Right. No. And this is stuff that, you're never going to hear in the media because, the media is always covering, the hot button issue of the time or what's going on the field, not necessarily what's going off, pleasant conversations off the field like that. So it's kind of cool to see the behind the scenes, like you said, the everyday talk like that.
What I also like to hear from Bobby is he didn't really say anything bad about the Browns draft. I mean, it was a solid draft for them. And I agree. I like the guys they took. He liked the guys they took. I'm glad to see nationally that the Browns aren't getting ripped for taking a kicker in the 4th round because that's a good spot for them at Cade York, best kicker in the draft. And we all know about our kicking woes here. If you listeners out there remember our last interview with Phil Dawson on a couple weeks ago.
Right.
So, and by the way, I did find out, Scott, I heard that Cade York, up until being drafted, had never gotten into any contact with Phil Dawson. And then someone has given him his info. So
nice.
Phil is going to talk with him and give him some tips on those wins and the swirling there inside.
And the swirling and how to deal with all that. Oh, that's funny. That's really fun. That's good. He'll need it too, especially, kicking in late November into December and hopefully January if everything works out well.
Yeah. And not only that, when you talk about that draft, I loved his perspective on that David Bell pick, that wide receiver, because Bobby saw him firsthand in the Big Ten at Purdue. And then talking Ohio State, I mean, he's high on this team going forward with Ryan Day. I think I disagree with Bobby on the whole disappointment thing about national championship. And I get what he's saying. And I guess he's not wrong. He's right. But a team like that, seeing like a team like Alabama always going there and win, and Ohio State has been there last time in 2014. I get disappointed as a fan. You're there. Let's win it finally again. But you're in the conversation. You're there, and Bobby is right about that. I guess I just want them to win.
Right. No, I totally understand. I remember, he was talking about the 2002 championship game. I remember watching that. I was working evenings at my old job at WSAZ in West Virginia, Huntington, West Virginia, and I remember watching that because the news was delayed, and watching that it wasn't even a flat screen TV back then, and watching that and thinking to myself, wow, this is unbelievable. And now here we are 20 years. I can't believe that was 20 years, but I don't know, man. It's, you want them to win. We're right there.
Yeah, we're right there. And you know what? I'm going to make you feel even older, Scott. And I'm going to show my age to our listeners who don't know us personally. I was a junior in high school that year.
Yeah, I remember.
I know exactly where I was. I was in a buddy's basement watching that game. And when Maurice Carrette stole the ball stripped the ball after that interception was phenomenal. And then, of course, the anti-Ohio State fans will say phantom pass interference call, which it was not. That's been debunked. That's a conversation for
right.
So that was my first taste, Scott, of one of our teams growing up winning a championship.
Right. You got to put that into perspective. 2002, the Browns weren't anything, the Indians were coming down off of their 1990s plateau, and the Cavs were just kind of there at that point. So that was a good time. That was a really good time watching that game. So want to thank Bobby Carpenter for joining us here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify. You can subscribe to us both there. And if you just want to watch it on the internet, if you have your browser open and you're at work, you can just log on to Press Play Podcast. You can find Sabol Brothers Podcast and just play us right there on your PC. We'll have more episodes coming up, John. It's been fun, and we will join everybody coming up, I believe. Let's see now in a couple of weeks with a new episode. We're going to try to keep going down the road of football. We're going to also try to get more into baseball too now that the weather's improving, so it should be a good time.
Absolutely, and we got some good guests lined up here heading into the summer, which is really exciting for us and exciting for you guys as well. So we appreciate your listenership. Thanks so much, everyone. And Scott and I will talk to you guys again soon.